What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. In 1914, the government needed a way to line its quickly draining pockets. Fingers were pointed at the rich, and the income tax was born. But what started as just a small percent tax on just the richest Americans morphed over the decades to the point where today, almost half of everything that most Americans earn is taken and shipped off to the government. And today we find ourselves in a similar situation to 1914. Government coffers are running dry. They have unfunded blank checks just burning holes in their pockets, trying to push through spending bills, $1 trillion over here, $2 trillion over there. They're all screaming the question, how will this be paid for? Well, Janet Yellen was recently on CNN attempting to answer that question. She was explaining that they are attempting to push through a tax on unrealized capital gains. Just as in 1914, this is targeted, it's aimed only at the very richest people, for now. But inevitably, this will devolve into a broader wealth tax, and the burden will be mainly borne by the class that always bears it, and that is the middle one. And the only thing that makes me more upset than this is how much my toe hurts right now, because I broke it 3 days ago doing the worm. And no, unfortunately for my ego, I'm not joking. Anyway, in this video, we are going to talk about 3 things. Number 1, what exactly is being proposed here with this tax on unrealized gains? Number 2, what will it inevitably devolve into and change into? And then number 3, why is it so destructive? Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so what is this proposed tax? Well, it's a tax on unrealized gains. So we have to compare that against the taxes we're familiar with. Number 1, we've got the tax that most people are familiar with, which is an income tax. Now, an income tax, the way that it's implemented, which I'll explain the difference later between implementation and original intent. Income tax is, hey, you get written a paycheck for $5,000, $2,500 of that makes its way into your bank account. The other $2,500 goes off to the federal government, state government, city government, and various other taxes that the federal government has implemented, like Social Security and Medicare. Now, if you've ever done any investing, you might also be familiar with the second tax, which is the tax on realized capital gains. So you sell a property for $500,000. Let's say you bought it 5 years ago for $200,000. $300,000 of that is the gain. You bought it for 2, you sold it for 5, you got $300,000 left over. That is the realized gain, and you're going to pay taxes on that. Same thing with stocks. If you sell a stock at a higher price than what you bought it at, the difference between what you bought it at and what you sold it at is your realized capital gain, and you will pay a tax on that just as you do with your income. Now, both of these from an implementation standpoint are pretty easy. They're pretty simple because, hey, you made a certain amount of money, and we as the government, we are going to take a percentage of that for our own paychecks. But we don't yet have a tax on unrealized gains. There are a few good reasons for this, why there are not taxes on unrealized gains yet, and there are big problems that will get in the way of implementing them like they're trying to. The first reason for this is because of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution technically does allow the federal government to tax income. Now, when you really dive into it and they define what income is, there are 3 Supreme Court cases in which they defined what that word in the 16th Amendment of the Constitution means, and all 3 court cases said that the word income means business profits. So the fact that you get a paycheck from your employer and the government taxes it is technically a violation of the way that the word income has been interpreted by the Supreme Court in the Constitution, because then technically the Constitution only allows the federal government to tax business profits. That's a discussion for another time, but what it does mean is that the Constitution, at its greatest stretching of what that word income means, still means the Constitution only allows the federal government to tax income. Now, they have also said that, hey, if you sell something at a gain as an individual, then we're going to say that those capital gains are counted as income because you bought something for $100,000, sold it for $200,000. That's $100,000 you made. We're going to say that that's income. But what cannot be considered income by any stretch of the imagination is an unrealized gain, because it's just that. It's unrealized. You bought your house for $400,000. Let's say it's currently worth $800,000. That doesn't mean you have $400,000 just sitting around that you can use to pay taxes on those unrealized gains. It's not liquid. You would have to sell the property in order to free up cash and turn it into a realized gain. Similarly, there are many very wealthy people who have most of their money locked up in assets, and they have a lot of unrealized gains, but it's exactly that. It's unrealized. They're not tapping into it. Otherwise, it would be realized. They'd be selling it and it would already be taxed as capital gains. Now, this is one of the things that bothers me about what Yellen said, is because she specifically said that most very rich people, a large portion of their income is unrealized gains. This is categorically false. It cannot be true because those gains are unrealized. The only way for that to be counted as part of your income would be to sell them and turn them into realized gains. Now, what she was talking about was the fact that they use those assets to collateralize against a loan. They take out debt against that, and debt is tax-free. But what do you need in order to pay back debt? You need income, and that income is already taxed. And if you really wanted to fix that situation, all you'd have to do is tax the debt. But they would never do that because we have an entire economy that's built on a foundation of very fragile debt. And if you ended up taxing debt as income, you would crush the entire foundation. You'd trigger a deflationary debt spiral because that debt couldn't be rolled over anymore. Nobody could afford that. And so that's definitely not something they would ever consider. So they'll just play mental games and pretend that unrealized gains are income. Now, the second reason that we don't have anything like this yet is simply practicality, because other than with public stocks, it's practically impossible to implement an unrealized gains tax on all assets, such as a broad wealth tax would. Privately held businesses many times take years to go through a process where people agree on what the actual valuation of the company is so that you could engage in a merger or an acquisition, just sell the business, whatever it is. But it takes a long time, and there's broad disagreement about what the value is of most private businesses. And other things like rare art or collectibles are even harder to value because many times there's nothing else to compare them against. Now, this proposal is currently aimed only at the super rich. How rich? Well, right now it would be aimed only at the 700 richest billionaires in the United States. So let's take a look at how much money this would raise, because we all know how much wealth these super rich people hoard and keep back from society and all the wealth that they control. So let's see what a wealth tax like this on billionaires would raise. 200 billion over 10 years, not every year. 200 billion total over 10 years. To put this into perspective, right now they're trying to pass $1 trillion here, $2 trillion there in spending bills. This is $200 billion that this would raise against $3 trillion that they're trying to spend right now. And they're trying to pass this off as if this is going to pay for that. And here's where we start to see the true purpose of an unrealized gains tax. Precedence. Because just like the income tax in 1914, once you have precedence for a tax, you can expand it on everybody. Because the truth of the matter is, you cannot pay for things by just taxing the rich. There's just not enough money there. To show you what I mean, let's say you took every last penny from the top 1%. 1%, that's huge. You got people in there that don't consider themselves rich. So let's take the top 1% in America and take everything from them, every single penny, and let's pretend that if you took all of Jeff Bezos's wealth, you took all of his shares, he had to sell all of his shares in Amazon and give them to the government, that the shares in Amazon would retain their value, which it wouldn't. It would crater the price of the asset that was being liquidated. But let's pretend that reality goes out the window here. All of the wealth gets transferred from the top 1% into the hands of the government. How much money is that? Right now, $42 trillion. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, right? How long would that last in the hands of the government? At the current rate that they're spending, it would last just about 6, maybe 7 years if they slow down a bit. That's right. If you took all the wealth from the top 1%, the government would burn through that in 6 years. And then there'd be nothing left. Gone. Not to mention, you would essentially destroy the wealth creation machine. All goods and services, the real wealth that's created in an economy is created on the foundation of that capital base. It's quite literally slaughtering the golden goose, and it's happened before in world history. This is what they did in the Soviet Union. They went around attacking the rich, slaughtering them or sending them off to the gulags, and then they would take all of their possessions. And many times in that country, in that day and age, the rich were the people who had a small farm. They had a couple of animals. So they went around the country killing all the rich, taking their animals. What do you think the non-productive people did when they took over rich people's assets, which was a couple animals? They killed them and ate them. The reason they didn't have a farm themselves is because they didn't know how to handle animals. They didn't know how to run a farm. They didn't know how to be productive. So when they took it from the people who were productive, they used it up. Now, what do you think happens when an entire country goes and kills and eats all of its animals? You now have no animals, now you have a famine, and to this day in Russia, the total number of livestock has still not fully recovered. Okay, so you can't just take everything from the rich, there's just not enough there, and it kills the golden goose. But you can use it as a reason to slowly move down the wealth chain, because the real honeypot is 401ks, IRAs, brokerage accounts, middle-class Americans' homes, mutual funds. Again, just like they did with the income tax. Start it targeting the super rich and then eventually expand it to everybody. And they would love to take 10%, 15%, 20% of every single gain that you have across all of your assets every year. Now, the good news is that the likelihood that this actually gets passed in its current form goes down every single day, especially with the uproar that this is causing across social media. Many people are very upset by this, and especially with the razor thin margins that they have in Congress right now, it's unlikely to go through, at least in its current form. And even if it does, the desired results are likely doomed upon arrival for two reasons. The first is that the rich are rich for a reason, and they know very well how to avoid losing as much money as possible. And it's explicitly stated that this would target liquid assets such as publicly traded stocks, mainly for the practicality purpose. It's not going to be very practical for the IRS to hire enough people to correctly value very illiquid or rare items. So guess what the rich will no longer own? Liquid assets. What's the one type of asset that most Americans own, most middle-class Americans own? Liquid assets. This leaves dumb money, small money as the bag holders in liquid assets, because most private assets are legally restricted to only the rich. Poor people cannot invest in most private assets through accreditation laws, which means that the only thing that poor people can own are the things that are going to be taxed the most without even having realized gains, and the things that rich people will own will be the things that are exempt from those unrealized gain taxes. The second reason it's doomed on arrival is because if you have a tax on unrealized gains, you must also have a deduction on unrealized losses. Now think about this for a second. How popular do you think politicians will be if they pass a tax law and it ends up that next year hundreds of billionaires, after a stock market correction, a stock market crash, are getting written hundreds of millions of dollars in refund checks from the IRS for unrealized losses? How popular do you think those politicians are going to be? That's a riot waiting to happen. Now, if passed, this is just the latest in a broad push towards confiscatory monetary and fiscal policy. As the Rothschilds said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." The only saving grace here is that self-destructive policies like these are exactly that. They are self-destructive. Any organism that grows too large eventually collapses under its own weight. And an oppressive and confiscatory regime will eventually crush the structure that holds itself up. We'll have to wait and see what the final form looks like if and when it finally gets passed. But as for now, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.